Okay, so welcome to the online launch of the study of social inclusion, digitalization, and young people. We'll still be waiting for the people to join. You can, while we are getting ready, you can also use the chat function to introduce yourself. You can write to panelists, and you can also write to panelists and all attendees. And also to inform everybody that this video will be recorded and is also going live on the Facebook account of the partnership between the European Commission and the Council of Europe in the field of youth. Okay, so we have some of our panelists joining in the chat, but also some of the participants. While we are getting ready, I will just share the screen of the study to basically quickly introduce the study on social inclusion, digitalization, and young people. So this is one of the products that stemmed basically from the 2018 symposium on the same topic. And last year, the partnership between the European Commission and the Council of Europe in the field of youth, together with some of the researchers from the Pool of European Youth Researchers and other experts, worked on producing the study and also youth knowledge book on the same topic. As some of you might know, the launch of the study was planned this year and this spring, but now we are doing the online launch. And we have with us today all the authors of the study. So I will quickly introduce all of them. So Adina, Serban, Veronica, Ștefan, Dan Moxon, and Dunja Potočnik, and myself. And today, Veronica and Adina are going to do a presentation of the final results, and then Dan and Dunja will also be there to join to answer some of your questions, but then also to add on some of the findings of the study. The webinar will last 1 hour, and we would like to ask you during this time to please add all your questions and comments either in the Zoom webinar chat or in the Q&A option of the Zoom. As you might have noticed, everybody is muted at the moment, but you can use then the option to write your questions. Okay. For those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, you can also type your comments or questions in the Facebook, and we will be taking all the questions at the end of the webinar after the presentation, and then we can also have some interaction. Okay. So to start off with, basically, the study has explored some of the concepts and questions related to social inclusion, digitalization, and young people, what these concepts are, but then also discussing what are some of the national policies and European policies in place. And also we have spoken about what are the opportunities and risks of digitalization for young people and for social inclusion. And some of the main findings of the study came from the questionnaires, which looked at the tools and platforms available for young people and also for youth workers and educators. To see what are some of the available tools that are there, what are the tools that youth workers and young people are using when it comes to social inclusion. So basically, to start off with, we wanted to ask you the question with the Mentimeter. So what you need to do is basically go to menti.com and type in the code 197032. So 197032, And you will have a question, which we will try to show as we go ahead. And the questions are basically, does digitalization facilitate social inclusion? And you will have 4 answers to choose from. Okay. So you can go on Menti and we will show some of the results towards the end of the screen, towards the end of the presentation. So now I would like to give floor to Adina and Veronica to basically introduce the study and take you through some of the findings before we go to the questions.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adina Șerban, and thank you for joining this webinar. I hope that you're all safe and enjoy the opportunities that the digital world offers to us when the offline world is not that fun anymore, but challenging enough. As Anna was saying, it's been an amazing learning journey, and I'm saying that it's been an amazing learning journey because I've just introduced myself a bit. I'm a grassroots youth worker working with young people from the rural areas. I'm also a youth researcher, part of the pool of European youth researchers, and I've been also involved with policy making, being a former member of the Advisory Council on Youth and being quite close to different political and non-political processes. So moving a bit around the magic triangle when it comes to youth. So this opportunity to work with the steering group on the study took me again to this triangle and offered me the opportunity to look at the angles and to see what the opportunities and also the challenges are. Well, I think that looking at this study, we should also have a disclaimer in our mind, and that would be that we worked on the study before all the crisis with COVID started. So also looking now at the question that you'd have to answer in Mentimeter, that was at that time part of the reality that we could imagine, but now the reality that you are working on might be different. I'm also now thinking of the grassroots youth workers who are quite challenged in offering still learning opportunities to young people that they work with. So that's why I'm asking you to look at the study, looking at the reality we had couple of months ago, and somehow maybe it would be a good starting point to think of what this crisis brought us, and maybe to, yeah, why not, maybe the partnership would also have something in the plan to go on with the study and to see what's changed during these months. But yeah, going back to what we have at the moment, I have a short presentation that I would like to share with you. Okay. So yeah, why this study, and why thinking that social inclusion and digitalization should be looked at together? Where going back to youth interests and needs, we all tend to think that all young people are online. And of course you would say, no, not all young people are online. Well, we know that. But we also wanted to see if there are opportunities that are being offered to those young people who might face challenges in being online, and also if they're online, what's happening there in terms of social inclusion. There are plenty of groups of young people who either don't have the opportunity to get online, thinking now of missing the infrastructure or not having the equipment, or the fact that at times we use a language that it's not either youth friendly or they cannot understand it. So due to different reasons, they might not have the access to this digital world. And this is why we wanted to see a bit the reality through this study. And that's why, as Lana was saying, we tried to look at a bit at the concepts and understandings of social inclusion and exclusion, also to the digital knowledge and the opportunities. So what's there online and should be appealing or challenging to young people, and also to look at the existing legal frameworks. Well, either you like it or not, that's the thing. We have also to look at those wonderful documents that are there. And we wanted to explore the way that these opportunities are being used, and to see if this digital world really impacts somehow the inclusion of young people. where we are used to look at social inclusion and to think all these safety nets. Yeah, so to think of employment, to think of education, of family, so all these safety nets that would support a young person into fulfilling its personal or professional development. But then, do young people with fewer opportunities have all these safety nets? And we would say, well, but the digital world may make things easier to handle. Is that still a question? Do they make things easier to handle? And also with digitalization, well, it made our life easier when it comes also thinking to this webinar, that we have this great opportunity to be here together to speak of the study and to everything that's happening in the online world. But does it really impact social inclusion of young people with fewer opportunities? That's why we put in place a methodology where we used two main instruments of data collection. That was the DES review. I was mentioning before about the wonderful documents that we have there. So policy documents, literature review, everything that we could find available. And also an online questionnaire that was circulated. And here we are extremely grateful to EQIP, so to the European Knowledge Center on Youth Policy, because the correspondents did answer to our questions. And also what was also important, it was the fact that it was circulated to practitioners. So that was youth educators, youth workers, NGOs having expertise. So we tried to collect all these practices that Veronica would present later using this magical triangle still. And we tried to, as I was mentioning earlier, to see where's the youth policy at the moment, focusing on social inclusion and digitalization, to present practices. And again, you'll say, well, but there were not practices from the country I come from. Well, maybe we didn't have answers on that. So that's why I would say that it's an open repository, because we could also update it. And also to look at the risks of and opportunities. It would be great if the digital world would come only with opportunities, but there's a wide range of risks that we should be aware of. With social inclusion, I would say that it was an easier mission, because there's plenty of policies that were drafted, there were plenty of practices, and we are used somehow to work with social inclusion in practice. So we write projects. We tend to believe that we are able to work with different groups of young people with fewer opportunities, and keeping our mind that they might face more than one of those obstacles. So we thought that it was easier to do that. With digitalization, again, everyone, when speaking of digitalization, would jump to thinking of digital natives. So if you are born in 90s, 20, then you could definitely have the competencies to go online to do things, but is it real, or it's only a wonderful theory that we just jump immediately to work with? And where's the gap between digital natives and immigrants? So how does this digital world look like when it comes to as well opportunities for young people, youth workers, and why not for the youth policy field? Then also, I was mentioning earlier, what do young people do online? Because yeah, we are now holding this webinar when school is happening online, when education, yeah, either if parents or teachers or children, young people liked it or not, it's happening online. So where young people used to use all these learning opportunities before in the online world, or is just happening now? Because from the data that was available, we saw that some of them were mainly using it to have fun online, but then less for these learning opportunities that they were offered. And Dan did a wonderful job in helping and collecting all this information during the 6th cycle of the structured dialogue, where they were looking also at the young people do interact and use these learning opportunities online, looking as well at the minority groups. And compared to the majority groups, again, it was less chances to go online and to benefit of all these opportunities that adults or institutions would put in place for young people. And yeah, moving now to what we as youth workers are doing at the moment. The conclusions on digital youth work of the last year were saying that we as youth workers should definitely develop our skills and competencies to be able to help young people still fulfill their personal and professional potential in this online world. But that would require also a great learning process for youth workers as well. And there's always the question, is this online and smart youth work that we are doing coming up with the same outcomes as the traditional way of doing youth work, of providing youth work services? And if we are doing this digital youth work, are we able to outreach to those young people with fewer opportunities, young people from different minorities groups? That's an open question we have at the moment, and it would be great if you could share good practices that you've met, that you came across, or good practices, or practices, whatever, not calling them good practices, but practices that you have in your organization in terms of digital youth work, and you could share with your peers as well. Going now to the relevant policies, well, we looked at the EU policy and also the Council of Europe policy, and it was obvious that what comes for young people, it's there within the wide range of European policies. So it was a great approach on competencies and on the fact that all citizens need competencies to deal with this digital world. But then where are young people in this process? So it's a very general, I would say, framework that, yeah, did offer young people some opportunities to develop some competencies, but not that much in terms of linking digitalization and social inclusion. Council of Europe, yeah, did some steps, and the Youth Partnership has a great amount of resources that they've produced, and a lot of great outcomes through the symposia and through the events that were run so far. But you would see also in the study that thinking of the two concepts together is still at the beginning also in the policy field. In terms of national policies, we've got 38 answers from 23 countries, and geographically speaking, it was a very good coverage. And we also got answers from state and not state actors. So it was great to see that youth NGOs and youth networks did share their practices as well. Through this survey, we wanted to see what's happening there for young people, and thinking that young people should be involved in the process as well, but there are still some steps to be done in that sense. It was a lot of examples that were shared, mainly related to the impact of digitalization in formal education. So most of the states did some steps into that to support a bit the infrastructure development. And yeah, that's an emergent need these days. Schools got access to internet, and some of the public digital services were there as well. So a lot of on formal education and on some public services. And you can imagine that these were mostly the answers that the state actors provided us with. In terms of examples, well, I only have here some countries, so some answers that we collected, but if you'd go back to the study in the annexes, you'd find the full answers in different countries, different topics, so you could always go there and check if someone from your country answered to that. Yeah, so for example, in Albania and in Estonia, there are some policies in addressing digitalization in line with inclusion and online safety. So some steps that were done so far. Croatia and Germany, there were mainly answers related to linking somehow this part with developing competencies in the digital world to working with young people, but not necessarily with young people who would come from different minority groups. And in other countries where the new national youth strategies or updated ones would have a chapter on digitalization and young people, but not really highlighting social inclusion on that. Also, there are tools that might be youth-friendly, and we found them being youth-friendly through the analysis that we put in place. So in Estonia, there's a tool that monitors young people at risk and provides some opportunity for early intervention. As in Greece, we also found out some participation platforms for young people. But again, it's also the question if young people that we are mainly interested into. So young people with fewer opportunities, if they have access to those platforms, or how are they using those platforms. Also, there's some monitoring related to the process of digitalization in Austria, and we're still looking forward to see if this monitoring instrument would bring us more information when it comes to linking the two concepts. Yeah, there's still the open question that I was mentioning before. Would this change somehow youth work and youth work services, and particularly thinking of those youth services that would help us outreach more young people with fewer opportunities, so those young people who face different obstacles when it comes to their social inclusion? That was the, I tried to make it brief. And I would kindly ask also my colleagues if they would still have some important comments that they would like to ask.
Great, thank you so much, Adina. I see that we have some questions from some of the attendees, but we will take the questions at a later stage. So I don't know if Dan and Dunya would like to add anything. Dan, I think you had some comments.
Yeah, I think just to really emphasize that the point that Adina opened with, that this happened before COVID. So at the time when we started this process, there was really a feeling that from a lot of the youth sector that digital tools were always automatically inclusive and always reached more people. And I think standing here several months later, there's a lot more realization that that's not the case. So it really can't be emphasized enough how much things may well evolve rapidly over the next few months.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, this is a very important point that we raised also when preparing for this webinar, that the results of the study, which now seems to be more relevant than it was even at the time when we started in April last year, basically that there have been many changes taking place within our context, and this also has impacted on the way young people use digital tools, on the way others as well use digital tools and opportunities of digitalization, but also the questions regarding the gaps and inequalities that this actually has also raised. Okay, thank you so much. Then we go on to look into the practices, and I give the floor now to Veronica.
Hi there. So I'm Veronica, and together with Adina, Dan, Dunya, and with the supervision of Lana, we have managed to put together this study. Well, from my perspective, and that's a very brief introduction from my side, I was happy to be part of this process from the very beginning, when we first had the symposium, connecting the dots, and then the steering group, and now today. And of course, I do share the opinion of my colleagues that this is a beginning somehow, considering the times and the context we are living in. But digital was on the agenda before as well. So the study came quite naturally, looking to what existed, what happens from the EU to the member states, both in the EU and in the Council of Europe context. And the fact that the Estonian presidency at that time to the EU Council put the focus on digital youth work was probably one of the biggest advancements in terms of policy recognition, but also in terms of generalizing some practices. And many exchanges have happened. Many Erasmus projects have been written. So just to start, as time is precious here in the online world, particularly, I guess. Let's see. From my side, I will start with, let's say, it's kind of common or not to think digitalization will change youth work, they said, or so they said. And here is the question: did it change or not? And that would be for you to answer. So in addition to Lana's Menti, I would put another one to use. So if you go to Menti, you'll find the code 316815. And then you'll have the opportunity to grade, let's say, or to make your options. Did it change or not, based on your experience? So it's not about what we are going to tell you. It's not about the books. It's not about anything. It's just how you have experienced it or how you understand. You can agree with all of them or disagree with all of them. That will still be fine. So I hope you can see this Menti. And while I'm going to go through my presentation in key points, you can keep having a look at it. Okay, so going back to the key presentation, in terms of practices, what the study looked at? Well, we looked at two main dimensions from the practices perspective, in addition to the policy one. One is related to digital tools and online platforms, and the second one is related to digital education, basically talking about the programs and opportunities that are out there and that we have learned about. At all times, we have looked through the lenses of both young people and youth workers or other practitioners. It is important to say that even if I'm going to refer, and most of the times through the study we refer to youth workers, actually we are dealing with educators and practitioners in the wider sense. So it's not just the classic youth work, also because youth work doesn't have one understanding in all the member states in the EU or the Council of Europe. That is important to know. When looking at the platforms, well, we cannot look at the national context without looking at what is out there. And probably these platforms will be the ones that we are most familiar with, especially nowadays, especially in the context of the pandemic. And just briefly, we have three types of platforms that are mostly popular. And one of those we are using right now, virtual meeting room software such as Skype, Zoom, WebEx, Discord. And I underline that because in youth work, Discord is a platform for gamers. So basically young people are already there using these kind of platforms in itself. It means that you can easily outreach to them. Messaging applications, as we are all aware of. So these are just some examples. The variety really depends on the different contexts. Educational platforms, they're also of great support, as it seems, because not all countries have their own national platforms. These one come in handy in these times as well. Coursera, Khan Academy, Scratch, or Kahoot. Some of them provide content that you can just access regardless that you are a young person or a grown-up. And some others enable creativity and knowledge. Scratch is a platform for advanced digital skills in a way, but also initializing, let's say, or introducing children and young people to coding and programming. Kahoot is a very important tool for youth workers that they can use to tailor their content and to create more engagement content. So I think all these platforms are important to remember because they exist. Most of them have either free features or are completely free, so using them it's always useful, and the study managed to map them a little bit at least. In terms of the European level, we have mapped some platforms that are there and that provide either more resources or provide tools and content by themselves. On the one hand, we have the online repositories. It is worth to say that they have been created through Erasmus Plus projects. So Erasmus brings, again, an important added value in understanding and developing knowledge and content for youth work. DIGI Youth Portal is one, ICT for Youth Work is another one. There you can find more information about different online tools and platforms that are available, different projects and practices that have been implemented. The European Youth Portal, probably for most of you, it's quite a common tool that can be accessed, a EU interinstitutional platform, Salto Youth platform, and then I highlight this particular too. Well, we are at the webinar hosted by the Youth Partnership, and Youth Policy Essentials is the first MOOC that focused on this topic. And in case you didn't have the time to take it, you can write it down and have a look later. Youth Work Portfolio, for those that are seniors, if I can say so, in the youth work sector, they might be familiar with this tool that was created by the Council of Europe in 2006. but it has been upgraded to the online version and can be used by youth workers to use it for self-assessment, to keep track and create the learning objectives for themselves as well. So this is, again, a very generic overview on the European platforms that exist at this point. Moving on, we looked a little bit at what were the practices, as mentioned before, across the member states. So what did we find? We find platforms that are addressed to young people, youth workers, or somehow that are created by institutions and address multiple stakeholders. Now, my presentation highlights the mainly part. So they are mainly addressed to young people. Some platforms are not exclusively created for one or another, but there are generic tendencies. Okay, so from what we found, we managed to create 6 clusters based on the examples that we have been provided for. Of course, there is not one standard, and that probably should be the overall conclusion for the entire study. There is not one standard that is used by all countries, even when there are similar platforms. And probably it's worth to say that we are still in an experimenting stage, where tools are being created based on local needs or on hearsay sometimes. So on everything that someone feels there is a need or would like to have, and they are missing regardless of what is already available or not. So one of the platforms or the main categories we have identified are the educational and professional guidance platforms. They mostly support the educational path of young people, gaining ICT skills, self-assessing their skills, knowledge, opportunities to apply for jobs, or engage in gamified activities. It is worth to say that they sometimes are connected with both online and offline activities, but these platforms are there. And we have highlighted some examples in the study. A small disclaimer, in the study, we'll see some specific examples highlighted, but if you are interested, you can also have a look in the annexes. Over there, you can see more or less all the answers that have been sent through the survey. So it is good to see how people understood this context, this national context, and how they decide to describe that. A second category of platforms are related to information counseling. I suppose they might be familiar to you. They range from platforms that address emotional well-being, self-esteem. Some of them rights of people, of young people. Either they are dealing with young refugees, LGBTQI, or other issues. It really depends on the country where they are implemented, as countries, for example, such as Sweden might be open and might address different issues and topics. A third category would be health. In the health category, we have found the different types of platforms, ranging from those dealing with emotional crises of young people, depression, but also supporting young people with substance abuse, offering advice on the sexual activity. And to be honest, some of them include services like 24/7 support online, where young people can reach out sometimes to specialized counsel, sometimes to chatbots. So it is important to say that various forms have been put in place. The fourth category refers to platforms that in our study were particularly important, as they were targeting marginalized young people, because they were trying to make the life easier for young people in various categories. As I also have seen in your questions, we might have looked at the young people with the marginalized background in a more generic perspective. We have looked to identify different concrete practices. Either it was about supporting young people with the visual impairments, or people that have disabilities such as walking and other more physical ones. So these platforms exist there. They are very much related to accessibility and facilitation. Online safety, probably to be fair to say, it's one of the most popular type of platforms we could have identified, as many of them deal with cyberbullying, illegal content, harmful, some of them hate speech, probably not that many, but with the Sport Council of Europe as well and the Advisory Council, this topic has increased. There are many helplines, again, similar to other health platforms. They offer tailored support, reporting mechanisms to young people, some of them 24/7. This is important to say that these kind of platforms sometimes are not necessarily or exclusively dedicated to young people, but to parents, teachers, and other grown-ups that interact with the young people as well. And the last one is linked to dialogue and consultation. And I think we have seen most of these examples related to the EU structured dialogue, and Dan might give us a more detailed overview of how this happens. In the structured dialogue, youth councils and other youth organizations with national working groups have designed special platforms to outreach and consult more young people. Okay, moving on. Platforms mainly addressed to young people. Well, there are definitely these kind of platforms, to youth workers. There are definitely these kind of platforms. They might not be so obvious. Some of them are probably more focused on teachers. It really also depends. We haven't found so many well-defined platforms, but they can be somehow generic or multi-purpose if we want. They do have a purpose of complementing face-to-face work. So we didn't really find platforms that would offer services exclusively online, but in a way complement what's happening in other contexts. They are designed to improve the ICT skills, so probably the platforms that we'll identify are related to educational purposes, learning something, earning some form of certification, whether it's recognized or not at the national level. They are used as platforms to share experience, materials, and resources, so some sort of repositories, but also opportunities to interact between different categories. Again, it can be teachers or youth workers. And last, other platforms that support teachers, educators, youth workers to actively engage in online safety and basically guide young people in this process. So these were the examples. And then we have this third category that we put here. And here are the platforms that we have seen in place and are quite interesting. They are not necessarily dedicated to young people, but might be about young people or might use youth workers to implement them. On the one side, we had online registries, which is connected with the youth guarantee monitoring tools, for example, where public institutions, in some cases local or central ones, register young people based on the education, on the opportunities they have access to, income level. Either they are dropouts, the youth guarantee in particular was looking at young people in not employment, education, or training, the so-called needs. Others are related to participatory budgeting platform. They are probably not that common, but where such a mechanism exists, because it has to be underlined. First of all, such mechanism has to exist at the local level in most cases. They have created online platforms for that as well. And AI-powered chatbots, well, we haven't found that many examples. We have heard more about them probably after the crisis. But in Austria, the youth services were actually using them and implementing them by the time we already had this study created. Okay, moving on. Adding to the digital tools and platforms, we looked at what educational practices we have. Again, we looked at the programs and opportunities, both for young people and youth workers. Digital education is a rather sensitive topic in a way, and probably the effects of it or lack of it, we can see mostly today. So when looking at digital skills and educational programs, it is fair to say there is no generalized practice. So there is no practice in the way we do it. There is no practice in the way we aim to develop them. Either it's about basic skills or more advanced digital skills, such as programming or more advanced functions of using the digital world. What we have discovered are more or less 5 directions, and one is mostly those that we have identified are initiated or even led by NGOs, youth centers, or services, or even private entities. So that can be companies or other foundations that do it for profit when they organize it. But we also have governments and educational institutions that usually deal with the formal part of the education, and they do deliver courses on basic ICT skills. For example, in Sweden, at primary school, at least, digital skills were compulsory. So it was in the responsibility of the government to deliver it. In terms of funding, there is not one way of doing it, but we have noticed that the EU funding has been used quite generously in funding this, but also private. And also this might raise the question that we might have dealt with it in a different study, and that is the most advanced courses on digital skills, such as programming, coding, in many cases, they require a fee, which might not make them that accessible for all young people. And some of the last points, most of the trainings are delivered in face-to-face formats. So even if it's about digital skills, we haven't really discovered so far platforms that would go from beginning to the end to teach you or to support in developing a digital skill, but they do offer complementary online materials. So the digital world is about learning new things, but still in face-to-face formats. And wherever they exist, especially in the countries that offer more opportunities, there are also some educational opportunities for advancing and understanding what is online safety and creativity. And by creativity, we have seen examples such as maker spaces, where young people are encouraged to use their digital skills and creativity to develop new things. Okay, that would be on the young people side. From the youth workers and educators side, we looked at 3 dimensions, if you can say so. On the one hand are the European efforts. These were to say, and in the first part of the study that Adina introduced, you will see the different frameworks that exist at the European level developed by EU institutions. We are not referring to them, but to other resources that have been created. Maybe not all EU resources define that what digital youth work in itself, but digital competencies for educators, competencies for organizations. So one of the tools is this one, the policy recommendations on developing digital youth work, which was done by a working group commissioned by the European Union. So it kind of refines the competence defined in the EU DigiComp, Digital Competence Framework, and adds more to the youth work dimension. Then we have other 2 tools developed by, in this case, by NGOs, European Guideline for Digital Youth Work, and then developing online youth information trainings. So these are resources that you can see. They also come with practical examples. In terms of national frameworks, we chose one of the very few examples we have received, and that is the Ireland's practice, as they have 2 national frameworks that particularly address the development of skills on a general level, but also in particular the school level. And in terms of the national topics, well, where we have seen there is more a variety of practices and not a very particular standard that we can put in just a single category, but the diversity of topics that they approach. Cyberbullying is one of most popular, as we said, then social engineering, understanding what is the impact of social media safety online. Okay, since the time is moving very fast, I'll try to go fast a bit through opportunities, risks, and implications of digitalization. But first, I will have a short look at what you have chose before the Menti question. So that was the question, digitalization has changed youth work. And so far, I think we have a winner, and that is digitalization is just another dimension of youth work. Closely followed, not yet, maybe after the pandemic. And one of the least voted, if fully implemented, digitalization will solve the problems of previous youth work practices. Okay. Let's see what we did discover in a way related to these questions. Also, we looked at how young people and youth work deals with it. In terms of opportunities and risks, there are both. And probably it's worth to say, many of them start from the digital skills, as they are both an enabler, but when they don't exist, they actually increase the gap. And probably something we can measure about this will happen after the crisis. In terms of opportunities, we've looked how they influence health and well-being, as they do support the bypass of contacting professionals. So technology might facilitate this dialogue, and it does. So it might destigmatize spaces, and does that as well by offering resources. So it's a way of saying that social media, it can be a tool, a beneficial one for young people in particular, and it might help with their mental health as well. Communication and information, I guess that goes without saying. I'll not insist too much on this topic. Participation, and probably participation should be dealt with a bit more in the future, as there are many tools that are available. Probably there should be a way to analyze better which one of them are most popular, which one of them are most effective, but the diversity of these platforms exists. Definitely it's there, it's part of our reality. Either we use the social media or specific government platforms. And creativity and self-expression, we should not really neglect this power of technology and digital tools. Blogging and blogging are the tools that young people use today. Either it's the YouTube channel or the TikTok platform, but they are using it, and it's enabling them. But also platforms such as Scratch and Codework actually supports their development of advanced digital skills, transforming them in future professionals in technology. And from the risk side, well, there are risks, and we are aware of that. It's important not to let ourselves overwhelmed of them, but not ignoring them either. Cyberbullying, harmful online content, information bubbles, and critical thinking, privacy, and data protection. These are the four main categories. Cyberbullying is probably, as highlighted several times, one of the most widespread phenomenon, but also the content developed and accessed by young people online can create long-term traumas and personality problems. The information bubbles, well, do come in a world when we talk a lot about fake news and disinformation. So critical thinking, it is a sensitive issue we have to touch upon. Privacy and data protection. This is probably the newest and somehow cool, but yet not fully understood challenge that we deal with as more technologies actually access data, and we might need as youth workers and practitioners to be better prepared to protect it, but also to support young people in understanding how to protect it by themselves. And moving on, for the youth work, that will be the thing to see exactly how it happens. But from what we have studied and we have seen, the path from youth work to digital youth work, it's important to be understood as digital youth work does not represent a youth work method in itself, as it can be included in any type of youth work. And this is something Finland has been developed as a concept very well, but also the EU recommendation on smart youth work has underlined that digital media can be a tool, activity, content, but it still remains close to the basic ethics and value of classic old-fashioned youth work. Still, on the opposite side, or on the beneficial side, it does help to engage young people more effectively and productively than before. It could, and we highlight that part, reach more young people, but it really depends on the means, the possibility, the accessibility, and the price. And last but not least, AI power tool, this magic word, artificial intelligence, do or could have beneficial use for young people to reach to more young people, to offer tailored content, tailored support, yet it is a matter of seeing how much skill and expertise is in the youth sector, or how much expertise the youth sector has available in actually developing AI-powered tools. And last but not least, before passing the floor to our colleague, Adina, and to other panelists, here is the question, and the second one, and the last one, and I will leave this open maybe closer to the end. What is staying with you after hearing all this, after everything that we will discuss after this, when thinking about social inclusion, digitalization in youth, choose your 3 favorite words that will stay with you after this, so we can have a feedback and an input from all of you. Thank you so much. Lana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Veronica. If you can just stop the screen sharing. Excellent. Thank you so much. This will also allow all our participants and us to see the chat and the questions. We have also noted a number of questions coming from your side, both to the chat with all the attendees, but also directed only to the panelists. There were some technical questions to start off with regarding the availability of the presentation and the videos and whether it is going to be available afterwards. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we will have the recording of this presentation on our YouTube and on our Facebook channel. And also to tie in with some of the questions, our work on social inclusion, digitalization, and young people is not only limited to this study, but we have at the same time also worked on the Youth Knowledge Book. And while the study is based on not only the desk review, but also the questionnaires that we have received during last summer, but the knowledge book, on the other hand, presents a bit more of an insight into specific practices. And the chapters which we have in the knowledge book will look at some of the examples that some of you have already mentioned in the chat when it comes to working with young refugees, for example, or working with young people who have visual disabilities, visual impairments. So the knowledge book, which is coming up, it is in the final editing phase, will be able to give some more insights into specific examples and specific groups of young people and how digitalization affects their lives. I would like to go into the questions right away, as I know that we are short on time. And one of the first questions related to the study was about the minority groups and how these have been selected, or how the groups of young people we are addressing in the study have been identified. And to start off with, firstly, we had the steering group, which was one of the bodies basically that influenced how the study will be shaped and developed. And the steering group identified different groups of young people which should be included and considered within the study. But then as it progressed as well, it got a little bit more narrow. And I would like to invite Dan to maybe discuss the question of how the groups are selected, but then also to reflect on the question of the age groups of people of young people that were included.
Yeah, those are really good questions. And I think that the thing to stress is we've not necessarily done this study kind of on specific groups of young people, and there isn't a list of people we consider to be marginalised and excluded groups or minority groups, and a list that we don't. The real point of this study was to talk about inclusion in the way that you can talk about the general inclusion of young people as a whole group. So how do digital tools help include young people in the labour market? But we wanted to look at social inclusion from the dimension where there are different in groups, sort of subgroups of young people, if you will. So young people with disabilities, young people, young refugees, these kind of groups who are affected differently by digitalisation. We didn't produce a definitive list of who is considered in that and who isn't, because what we're really doing is exploring the policies and the practices that people in youth policy and youth practice are doing, rather than trying to interview directly young people. So similarly, that applies with the age ranges. We didn't specify a particular age range. It's not really necessary to do that. But we worked with the general concept that probably the Council of Europe has in the youth sector, that you're talking something around 13 to 30, maybe 35, this kind of thing. I think where your question on majority and minority groups comes from specifically is one of the pieces of data we used was the youth dialogue data, and that's a survey of 28,000 young people from across Europe, and that divides up, it tracks various categories or groups of young people, and those are ethnic minority background, disability, sexuality, gender, and religious minority backgrounds. So you can make a cluster of people who are the minority groups within that and look for general trends between them. There's definitely differences within those groups, and the knowledge book really flags that sort of thing up. So we have a chapter on the experiences of LGBT young people, the experiences of young refugees, the experiences of blind young people. But when you actually look at the all kind of anything that fits into that kind of youth dialogue categories of groups and majority and minority groups as a whole, you can still see differences compared to the overall population. So I hope that answers that question very quickly.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And I would like to invite Dunja, who is also one of the co-authors, to add on to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Dunja Potočnik, youth researcher from Croatia and a member of the pool of the European youth researchers. I would like to add only 2 points. First one is actually considering the overall EU level. There is a strong need to review the EU dashboard on social inclusion and to add additional indicators on digitalization, because at this moment, social inclusion and digitalization or online participation are completely separated in the EU dashboard. And we need to do this in order to have at least some kind of immediate basis for evidence-based policy. The second point is something that is very important and that is very often being neglected. And it is the need to involve young people as co-creators and partners in development and reinventing of the policies, platforms, tools, and approaches when it comes to social inclusion and digital media. And of course, in evaluation of all these components, because at this moment, if some approaches or tools for digital social inclusion are not being invented at the level of the grassroots organizations or youth activists, young people are very often being excluded. And it is a practice that should be abolished. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dunja. We have also received an addition from Slađa, who is working on the EU Youth Indicators, and she's also a member of a pool of European youth researchers regarding the revisions of the dashboard. So I'm going to ask Slađa to please type in, and I will read it up then for all the participants. Then also we had some questions regarding the digital youth work and basically how this has been addressed within the study, and also some practice sharing from the participants, from the attendees, in terms of how they have created. Dana has shared how they have actually created the framework on how to use digital tools within the context of social inclusion. Okay, then as we are nearing the end of our time, I would like to raise just one of the points regarding artificial intelligence, which was asked by Emilia from the Advisory Council on Youth from the Council of Europe. And this relates to the question of how we have included artificial intelligence within the study, but is it not explicitly perhaps analyzed within the practices, and this is because of the questionnaires that we have, the responses to the questionnaires we have received. However, artificial intelligence as a subfield, let's say, of digitalization has been analyzed, and it is also included within the knowledge book. We have a chapter on how artificial intelligence and algorithms actually can contribute to increasing inequalities. And also we will be talking a little bit more about this on the 12th of May in the upcoming webinar with Dan McKillen and Ron Salaj, who will be exploring how artificial intelligence actually impacts on different inequalities and gaps within the society, and how the digital divide actually also replicates the divisions within, or the inequalities within society. And this also brings me to additional question from Emilia, which is about the explanation of what we mean by how digital divide actually creates a voice divide. And I think this was actually the underlining, let's say, the base of our study, the underlying question, whether actually the digital tools can help young people who do not necessarily have the opportunities to participate within society on equal footing, or whether it actually inhibits their opportunities to participation, and whether it actually replicates the gaps that we are seeing in the society. And as you have seen from the study, we do not have the actual tools and platforms, and we have not been able to find them from the questionnaires that are implicitly including young people from disadvantaged social backgrounds. And I can see also that Slađa will be following up on the questions of indicators offline. So thank you for that, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to take all the questions due to the time. It was not possible, but I would like to go back to our Mentimeter from the start of the webinar, and to see what are your thoughts. So does digitalization facilitate social inclusion? And basically, so it is more or less equal. Nine of you actually think that digitalization does create more opportunities for all. 8 consider that digitalization can actually create more inequalities, and 5 say, I'm here to find out. None of the attendees are in the wrong Zoom, which is great news, or perhaps you realized that you were, but still decided to stick around to find out more. Okay, just one more thing before we close. I would like to thank all the authors of the study for their work throughout the last year, and also to emphasize that the study is available already on our website, and we will also be sharing in the coming days a one-page illustration or infographic summarizing all the findings of the study. So it will also be available in a user-friendly format for those of you who would like to see just some of the main highlights from almost 100 pages that are on our website now. Please do feel free to add some of the examples from your work in the chat. We would love to hear more from you, and also do feel free to continue the discussion on our Facebook. And we thank you for your attention. Thank you for the time, and we hope to see you on our next webinar then on the 12th of May, talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on social inclusion of young people. Thank you, and see you again next time.